On today's podcast, we're going to be talking about my Game of Thrones photo, but mainly my time at the Tulip farm. So, all right, here we go.
You knock me off my feet, please pick me up, 'cause I'm still down. I open my eyes, and you're not around. Yeah, you driving me insane. It's very, very plain. You got the power.
I've done landscape photography for a number of years. And one of the questions a lot of people will ask me is, hey, what kind of lenses are you using? What kind of camera, what kind of equipment are you using? And I don't enjoy answering that question because I always get the same looks, the same responses. And so here we go. I shoot on Canon. I shoot on Canon gear. I've done that for, since I've started from the very beginning. Mainly it's because of the ergonomics. Real quickly, just kind of a side note, when I was getting into photography, I actually wanted to purchase a Nikon camera. It was the same kind of camera that the photographer that photographed my wedding, he used. I mean, I was just enamored by it. So I saved up some money and I went to go purchase the camera. At the time, it was an actual camera store in the mall. I think it's okay to say the name. It was called Kids Cameras. They're no longer around. But I remember I had saved up, I had researched, I had spent months and months and months trying to figure out which camera I wanted. I go to the mall, I had the money in my pocket. It was literally burning a hole through my pocket. And I get there and I'm like, hey, I was talking to the clerk behind the counter. I was like, hey, bud, I'm here to buy this camera. I just want to take a look at it before I hash out the money. So he opens up the box and he hands me the camera, puts a lens on it. And I was like, ooh. So I grabbed the camera, and the very first thing that I noticed is that I felt like I could bend the camera in half. Now he's like, why don't you go, I was inside the store at the time, they were more forgiving, but he's like, why don't you take the camera right out front and just take a few pictures? So I'm like, okay, cool. So I'm walking out there, and the whole time I've got the camera in my hand, and I'm just kind of like, just gripping it with both hands, and I literally felt like I could have broken it in half. As I was grabbing it and squeezing it and just kind of, doing the quote unquote bend test, that was technically the real first bend test. I could hear it creak and I could hear it start whining as I'm bending it. And I'm just thinking in my mind, I'm ready to drop all this money on this, but I'm not happy that this thing, I feel like I could break it. So anyways, I go back and the guy's like, hey, how do you like it? And I'm like, I really like it. It's everything that I wanted, but it's just, it feels like a toy. And he kind of chuckles and he's like, yeah, this particular camera, I'm not going to give the model or anything. He's like, yeah, this particular camera, it kind of feels kind of toyish. So he's like, well, try this. He's like, we just received it. We haven't even put it out. We haven't put the display model on. It's still underneath the counter. So he goes under the counter, pulls it out, and it was a Canon 40D. He puts the lens on it, he hands it over to me, and man, the thing was like a brick. And from that moment, I was hooked. In terms of image quality and all that stuff, specs made no difference to me. I figured, I was going to get the same quality picture coming from me. I was going to be able to do the exact same thing, whether I was on Canon, Nikon, any particular brand. But what made the deal for me was the ergonomics. And ever since then, that's the one thing that when I'm purchasing camera equipment, I always go for ergonomics first before anything, because I know whether it's going to be rugged enough. I know whether or not how I can treat it, and I treat my gear very, very well. Like if you look at it, you think that it's never been touched, but no, I take care of my camera equipment very well. So I know I'm supposed to be talking to you guys about tulips. Well, it jumbles back and forth. So I ended up getting the camera, and that was just the start of going down the Canon ecosystem, going down that ecosystem. So anyways, fast forward many, many years, I really got into landscape photography, and even now I still do tons of landscape portraits. And I keep getting the questions, hey, what kind of gear do you shoot? What kind of gear do you shoot on? And I'm like, oh, Canon. And the very first thing people, they either roll their eyes or like, ooh, yeah, I'm a Canon shooter. Well, the thing about me is that I have slowly moved away from Canon in some regard. I still shoot on Canon bodies, and although I have lots of Canon glass, the lenses, and I've actually gotten into, within the last year or so, I've actually gotten to the point where I'm purchasing manual focus lenses from different brands. Before the autofocus really took over, quick side note for the side note is back in the 80s, Canon kind of took everything over because they added autofocus into their lineup, into their lenses. And at the time, Nikon had decided they were going to try to stick it out with their manual focus lens as well. Canon won the sports market, and from that point on, Canon's kind of always led in terms of the lenses and the speed of the lenses and autofocus. And nowadays, things are a little bit different, but that's kind of what took place in the 80s into the 90s. Well, I've reverted back to the 80s. Where I'm purchasing all these manual focus lenses. Why? Because I'm getting a quality to the lens that there's a quality to the lenses that is not necessarily found in newer lenses. And I don't want to turn this into a kind of gear review, but one thing about the newer lenses is that there are so many elements inside the lens that this corrects for this corrects for this corrects for the shape of the way that the light is coming inside the lens. Well, in the older lenses, they've only had 4 or 5 elements. The really, really nice ones, well, I shouldn't say really nice ones, a lot of the older lenses, they only have 4 or 5 elements, 6 elements, 7 elements. I think the one I'm about to tell you guys, I think it's 7 element. I'll have to look it up. But for example, my zoom lens that I have, my 70-200, the one I was telling you about, that's my bread and butter, that thing has, like 20-some elements, inside. Something crazy like that. And the way one person put it online, it was, I'm not going to post links on this, but he had put it, I've never heard it put this way, in terms of the difference between newer lenses and older lenses. And the way he put it was, the newer lenses, it's like with that many elements, the light has to pass through all those elements before it gets to the sensor. Well, the way he put it was, it's like taking a really nice, juicy steak, and you're basically putting it through the grinder, you're recomposing it, you're turning it back into a steak, you're putting glue in it to make it look like a steak, and then you're chopping it up with a knife, and you're putting it back into the grinder, and then you're doing all these different things, and at the very end, you make it look like the shape of a steak, and then you serve it out to somebody. And for most people, they don't realize that that's what's happened with some of these lenses. That's one of the reasons why you'll hear people talking about, especially the older lenses, that's why you hear people talking about how and why prime lenses are much better than the older zoom lenses. The older zoom lenses, it was taking that. It was just making your image and hamburgering it up and putting it onto the sensor, or putting it onto the film. And that's what was happening. So there's another term, it's called a Leica pop. And what that refers to is, when you take a picture of something, it almost looks like you photoshopped them onto the background. So I've got this photo. I went and did a family photo shoot last year, and I had popped on one of my lenses at my 85mm, and I had noticed that there was something unusual about that lens versus my 70-200. And as I'm going through, I was zipping through the images, and I just kept stopping at this one image here, one image there, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was that was catching my eye, but there was something about it that just caught my eye. I had to stop, and finally I'm looking through the picture. I'm just looking at it. I'm zooming in with the software, and I realized, wait a second. I know I edited a lot of these photos, but I know that I haven't gotten to this far into the selection yet, and I haven't done any photoshopping, or at the time I was using Lightroom, I haven't done any editing with this particular photo. All I've done is just gone through them. I've culled through the pictures, and I'm looking at it, and sure enough, this picture looks like I had photoshopped the little girl onto that background. The way the separation between where she was at and the background, I mean, it looked like I photoshopped her onto it. No joke. And even I showed it to my wife. I've showed it to a few other people on an unedited photo. And it caught me by surprise. And anyways, that little being able to make the photo pop out of the picture like it's a 3D picture. It's what's called, Leica has it, it's called the Leica Pop. And Leica is really known for their lenses having fewer elements causing that kind of an issue, or causing that kind of a scenario to happen inside the lens, or causing that scenario with the pictures. So I have a lens that I had no idea when I purchased it. I just purchased it because I needed an 85 millimeter, and this is way back when. And I didn't touch it for such a long time because I was using all my other lenses. Well, when I had this one photo shoot where I just needed to hammer out headshots, and I brought that lens, and it's kind of a special lens for me. I don't use it very often. I probably should. Like I said, I'm more into the 70-200, but it's an awesome. Look it up. It's called Leica Pop is the technical term for it. So, as photographers, one of the things that we suffer through, and I say we because this is more than just me, it's this thing called GAS syndrome, and it stands for Gear Acquisition Syndrome. What does that mean? It means that I found I need to have this tripod. This tripod's better than the one I have. That one has more features. This lens is going to be better lens than the ones I already have. Oh, look at this. This one was, this one can do this special thing. This lens can do that special thing. So we're always acquiring new gear, whether we want it or not. If you ask my wife, she'll roll her eyes and she'll just kind of laugh because many times she has said to me, I happen to bring home a new lens, and she looks at me and is like, okay, well, she's like, well, what are you going to sell in order to pay for that? And I'm just like, I want to keep all of it. I want to keep all of it. It's all, ooh. So anyways, so in one of my latest acquires, I picked up this particular lens. It's a Nikon lens. It's called a Nikkor 105. Nikkor 105, it's a 2.5, a Nikkor 105 f2.5. This lens, it's actually kind of a famous lens. If you guys are into National Geographic, there's a photographer, his name is Steve McCurry, who took, it's literally one of the most famous photos of all time, the Afghan girl. He took it with this lens, not the one that I had, but he took it with that 105 lens. The lens is awesome. The weight and renders, the look, the contrast. I mean, it's just gorgeous. I know I use the word gorgeous a lot, but it is. So anyways, when I headed out to the Tulip farm, because that's what this podcast is about, I took 3 lenses with me. I took my Olympus, my 28 millimeter lens. I took a 50 millimeter 1.8 Pentacon lens, and I took this new to me, Nikkor lens. And I first started with the 28 millimeter because, you know what, I've got lush fields of tulips, different colors, and different colors here, red, yellow, I mean, just lots of colors. And I figured, you know what, this lens has already been tried and true. I've used it on many different shoots. So it's one of the lenses that if I'm gonna go shoot landscapes, it's my dedicated landscape lens. I started off with the 28 millimeter, and then I quickly snubbed that, and I popped on the 105. And this lens, there's something special about it. I probably say about, 60-70% of all the photos that I took that day at the Tulip farm, I've had a lot of people ask me like, hey, well, what are you using? What kind of gear are you using? What lens are you using? Because the thing about the tulip season is, and I don't know if it's always like this or if it's just because I was paying attention to it this year, but man, everybody and their aunt or uncle came out with a camera to take pictures of tulips, and everybody was posting online. And it was funny thing is, it seemed like everybody just completely overwhelmed everyone with tulip photos, to the point where everybody finally said, enough, we've got too many. And then that whole kind of fad thing just kind of died. And maybe it's like that, like I said, maybe it's like that every year. I don't know. I haven't been around. I haven't been in an area where I've had the opportunity to be around tulips and to take pictures of tulips. So So the one thing that when it comes to my landscapes, yeah, I can take the picture that it looks exactly like a tulip. It looks exactly just the way it's being taken in front of my camera. But I like to spice it up, add a little bit of flavor, add a little bit of flair to my photos. So that's what I did, and I'm just going to jump right to, rather than going through all the different photos, I just want to talk about one particular photo, and it was, I'm calling it my Game of Thrones photo. I uploaded all the images to my software, and in my software, one of the presets that I have, especially if I'm shooting black and white in the camera, is I have a preset that turns all my colored pictures right into black and white right away. And the way I have it set is so it looks very similar to what I actually have on the back of the camera. The same kind of contrast, same kind of look. So that's in certain photos. So that's how I started this editing process. And I had edited the photo to make the black and white picture just look just very dramatic, very awesome. And I reached over to grab my drink, and my hand like smacked the clicker on my mouse, and it turned it from black and white back into color. And that's the mistake. That's quote unquote my mistake, because what happened was the way I had edited the black and white photo, it turned the petal, when I turned it back to color, the petals actually turned like this really vibrant, almost fluorescent type blue color. The green was, it was very saturated, it popped. And I think there was even a little bit of mist on the actual petals itself. So, and I'm like, oh my goodness. I was like, the first thing that popped in my mind is, this looks like the Night King on Game of Thrones. And I even posted it on Facebook. I'm like, you know what? If the Night King ever commissioned me to take a photograph of tulips, this is what it would look like. But yeah, so for a while there, that's what I was posting on Facebook. I was like, you know what? Hey, are you guys interested in purchasing a Game of Thrones type photo? Quote unquote, question mark, ha ha ha. Or I'm like, and I even posted that, I'm like, if the Night King commissioned me to take a photo of a tulip, this is what it would look like for him. So yeah, it's my Game of Thrones tulip photo, and it actually, I got a lot of I had a lot of people like it and comment on it, and it was so unique and unusual, because everything else, all the other tulip photos that are being posted on Facebook, they actually look like tulip photos. They look like the tulip field, and they're beautiful photos. Don't get me wrong, I'm not dogging on them. It's just, if you've seen one tulip photo, you've seen them all. And that's the kind of approach that I took with it, was that, I don't want to go to this tulip field and just take pictures of tulips, because that's no fun. You gotta turn it into, and maybe this is where my art side of me comes in, is that my artistic side. This is where my artistic side comes in, is that I look at that and I think, boring. What can I do to really spruce this up? And so that's where I try to get real kind of, artsy fartsy with it. My name is Josh Gutierrez. I'm with JK Life Photography, and this is the story behind the photograph.